All right, and we are live. Welcome back, finally, everyone, to episode 42 of the Endless Report. It's been a while since I think we've been on the stream here. Unfortunately, I was a little under the weather last episode, but thankfully, we were able to bounce back here. We even had some server issues with the stream here. We got that all taken care of, so we're here. We're live finally. So, very happy to see you all with us today, whether you're watching live or you're watching on the recording here. But that being said, of course, because of that delay, we have a lot to talk about today on the schedule. We just had the Super Bowl in the US here this weekend. I did mention a bit to some of you in the Discord chat on the studios as well, maybe some of the comments on the earlier streams that we were expecting some Super Bowl promo from PlayStation there. We had some, we'll show some of that during the show today, actually, but nothing crazy. So no new announcements for PlayStation yet. But that being said, we may actually have a PlayStation showcase or state of play, maybe just a smaller one on the horizon here, maybe even before the month of March, which is actually crazy to think of. That's in the next 2 weeks or so. So who knows what's happening here? But we have quite a bit of existing news to talk about as well. Of course, we had that Nintendo Direct last week, so some new announcements on Zelda. We had a Metroid announcement, which is really cool to see. So we have a lot to talk about here. I don't want to spoil too much all on this opening intro here, but I think we'd start off by talking about some of those past releases, over these last 2 weeks, like I mentioned. So we did talk about these briefly on the show when they did drop. Of course, Hi-Fi Rush, that was shadow dropped right before our previous episode. So, of course, that was our main topic of discussion. So we've had a lot more of the reverberations of that now. We've seen people actually react to it, get some longer reviews out, and that's been nothing but positive. So very good movement there for Microsoft. Some good stuff on the Xbox side of things. Very, very much a great drop from Bethesda there. Really surprised everybody. That being said, we also had Dead Space, really big game. It was on the horizon for a lot of people. Of course, Dead Space being one of those, I think, modern classics. You can almost say it's really a classic to a lot of people. I think, there was some commentary between the original team of the game and the remake team and how they remade certain things, and there was a lot of respect there. So very, very cool stuff to see as well. And we also had Hogwarts Legacy, which of course Harry Potter was ginormous. I believe it was actually the top streamed single player game on Switch all time, if I'm correct. I think there was a stat I saw on Twitter. So that's quite something. That's quite an achievement there. And then of course we have Season, A Letter to the Future. This is the one I was really excited about on PlayStation side of things because it was an indie game, a bit of a smaller game, but I thought really interesting. I played the demo for this one, and I thought I really great quality, really interesting concept story. Kind of you being almost an archaeologist, cartographer, and cartographing of your homeland here. So let me pull this trailer up. Actually, I figured I would show a brief mute that so I don't blow all that sound into my headphones here. It's quite loud on my end, but you guys can't hear the sound anyway. But as you can see here, it's a bit of third person gameplay. You get these first person sections where you're recording, whether it be sounds, pictures, you can take photographs, and you're kind of creating this living journal that while is inspired by, I believe, planned, parts and scenes in the game, you do have a bit of freedom there in what you capture and how I'm forgetting the right word here. I guess catalog is probably the best word. How you catalog and and how you play your role as a historian here. I really should say, in keeping the past in your journal. So I think it's a very cool concept. Very human, interesting story. I love the whole idea of it. Again, maybe I'm not communicating it as properly as I can because I played the demo myself, so I have a bit of insight there. But I do think it's very cool game. And as you've probably taken away from what I've been saying here, it's not much. There's no violence in this game. There's no combat, at least from what I've seen so far. So it's very much you going out, taking in this world, and really learning about these characters and the emotion and the humanity of this universe. And I'm sure there's a lot you'll uncover throughout the story with these characters that you meet here throughout the world. So very coul stuff. Again, I just thought that was one I wanted to note. It's one of the only releases coming out this week, and I think everything else I just mentioned, all those other games, all were kind of in the last week. When we did not have the report, so I wanted to make sure we mentioned all those. And that being said, I do want to move on to a bit more with PlayStation, as we did want to talk about PSVR as well. So of course, I feel like I've been talking about PSVR a lot these past few weeks, and I'll bring back our a docket here so we can kind of you can see what's on the horizon here. That being said, I did think there was a good amount to talk about there. Well, maybe we'll bounce back into it later in the show as we get on with some different stuff. That being said, here, as you can see on the docket, and it's a bit small on my end, but you could probably see the Super Bowl ads that I wanted to mention earlier. So I figured we'd just start that off since not a ton happened during the Super Bowl, and that's kind of the benefit of this episode being delayed is as going into Friday, I was going to say, hey, like, let's see what that commercial is going to look like. Maybe it is some huge, crazy announcement that, I didn't think that was the case. Hindsight's 2020. So it's convenient for me now to be like, I never thought it was going to be anything. But I did think, we had these live from PS5 ads, which I'm going to show you now and give you a little more context on what I was thinking. And I did figure it would be more of that. But that being said, we actually didn't get a commercial during the Super Bowl. It was only in Canada. So it was a little bit of a bummer on my end. I thought at least we'll get some sort of promo, whether it's no announcement or nothing. At least I got to see that PS5, see God of War and Spider Man and all the stuff we saw in this promo, and at least get a little excited there. But we did not get that during the big game, at least here in the US. On my end, they did not go out and shell that. I think it was $7 million for a 30-second spot. They didn't go out and do that this time, Sony, but we did get it online. And I guess that's just as good enough because you're going to see it here on the show anyway. So speaking of this ad campaign, the reason I bring it up is because PS5 is finally in stock everywhere. And if you weren't aware, this was not a regular thing up until really this month, up until right now. People were dealing with scalper prices, going to eBay, spending $600, $700, $800, maybe even more, which I do not recommend, especially now. There's no reason to recommend that at this point. Spending these large scalper prices to get a PlayStation 5. That was the only way you could get a PlayStation 5 in many ways. And whatever your opinion is on that, I of course would recommend getting it retail price. It doesn't matter anymore because they are officially in stock like pretty much everywhere. So Walmart, Best Buy, Amazon. If you're ordering online, you can go on Amazon or one of these sites right now and just buy a PS5, no questions asked, no trouble, no delays. So we're finally at the point here where we see these next gen consoles are fully in stock, and that's really exciting, both for, of course, consumers who want to get their hands on the latest games, but also Sony and Microsoft. We're going to see a lot more, I think, big booms in sales here. Of course, I believe PS5 is already at, I don't want to have the wrong number here because I don't have it at the top of my head, but huge sales numbers. We're in the millions for sure. I had the number 30 million, but I don't want to say that because I think that's crazy gargantuan, and I think I may just be a little hyperbolic there. But I do know PS5 is hitting huge numbers. That being said, I wonder what happens here. Do we see this plateau a bit now that it's more readily available? We don't have this crazy, incessant demand for PlayStation 5s, or rather, now that it's more available and this becomes more widespread knowledge, do we see a lot more people go out and jump on buying a PS5 as well, and it just continues to rise? I think somewhere in the middle there. I don't think it's going to continue to be as what's the word, unprecedented and just meteoric as it has been, but maybe I may be wrong here. We have a lot of releases this year. We have a lot going on. It could continue to just be this this crazy. I will say. That being said, I realized I didn't have my marker moved down here. I will do that really quickly just so I can update us as we go through the articles here, and I don't lose track like I have in the past. We're gonna sometimes that article can get lost there, but I want to hop us to this next link. Actually, same story, because this is where the marketing campaign comes in. So as I said there, PS5s are in stock, and Sony wants you to know that. So they came out with this marketing campaign, I believe, last week, kind of leading up. Essentially, what they're saying, it's live from PS5. We're here live in New York. We're a superhero. It's not something that you see Spider-Man here, of course. Miles Morales and Peter Parker both swinging, really, really cool. Then you see, of course, Aloy from Horizon here. We have a reporter saying there's been an uncovered ancient artifact, ancient lands, ruins. Of course, it's Horizon. Then we have there's winter weather here, Ragnarok. Of course, God of War. I believe I'm trying to think here. This is Final Fantasy 16, if I'm not mistaken. We have Ratchet and Clank. I think this one is pretty funny as well. Of course, we have Returnal on that one, Gran Turismo. So we're going through all the highlights here. Stray, that one we see there. Some people said maybe Uncharted. There's been a lot of rumors about that one there with that ancient artifact. You could see, of course, we have Ghost of Tsushima, a lot of other huge PlayStation properties there. So very cool ad if you're a fan, of course. Again, no new information there, and that's pretty much what they were hyping up for the Super Bowl. So I didn't think there'd be anything else crazy there, and I will show you exactly what I'm talking about in terms of the Super Bowl itself. But before we get to that, I did want to mention this, as I just did. I did say that some people were thinking this was Uncharted coming back. I don't want to give any spoilers if you haven't beat the recent Uncharted games or the latest in the series. All I'll say is there's no confirmation here. This may well be a tease on a new Uncharted series. Of course, we reported last episode, Naughty Dog, of course, the creators of The Last of Us as well, very big on HBO. If you're aware of that television show right now, if you're not aware of Naughty Dog, that's their Uncharted, The Last of Us, Jack and Daxter, my favorite series from them back in the day. Anyway, I digress there. They have discussed that they're not really looking back at Uncharted. They have said, they it's kind of a little bit in the rear view. They don't really need to make another Uncharted game here. They have a lot going on. Of course, The Last of Us, potentially a part three if that ever does get produced. The Factions multiplayer game, their new IP that's been rumored for a long time. Whatever is really, really next for Naughty Dog. We're still waiting to see what that is. But Uncharted seems to be in the back burner with all of that new good stuff going on. So they have said that the rumor that a lot of us have heard and seems to continue to be true here is that it's probably going to go to another studio. I don't think we see the Uncharted series just disappear off the face of the earth here. We just had a Tom Holland, Mark Wahlberg vehicle movie made for Uncharted, so I don't think we see Uncharted disappear anytime soon. I think not Disney, excuse me, HBO and Sony and all these all these companies involved with the television, The Last of Us, TV show, have seen how successful that's been. So I think, going back to the movie of the Uncharted there, I think we see a sequel for that. If not, if not being planned already, I think we see another Uncharted game in the near future at some point, maybe the next 2-3 years. I don't want to say it's that imminent. It probably needs some time to work on that, but maybe in the next 2-3 years we get an Uncharted from another studio, under the Sony banner. I don't think that's out of the picture here. And as we see in this trailer, we see this young girl here with a torch, very Indiana Jones, like going for this artifact in this cave here. That's the only, as far as anyone can tell here, the only major scene in this trailer that isn't linked to one of these news reporters and then a main game. I mean, we saw that Spider-Man one. There was the Gran Turismo shots. Everything there had a correlation except this one, and everybody's thinking this could very much be the new Uncharted game. So I don't want to say any too much more about why I think that, because I don't want to spoil anything from the Uncharted series. But you're not seeing Nathan Drake here. All I'll say is that doesn't mean, again, I'm not implying anything about it. Again, don't take this with too much context there, but I don't think there's anything you need to worry about here. This could be an alternate character, another thing in the Uncharted universe. I very much think that's a possibility. So just wanted to point that out. Speaking of that, I was wondering if I may have to step up during the show today, because I actually have a PlayStation order on the way here. I thought I might have to sign for it, but I just saw it got delivered on my computer here, so I'm gonna hope that I can wait till the end of the show here and go grab that at my house here. That being said, speaking of PSVR, I did actually go ahead and order the PSVR. That's what I'm discussing here. I didn't get it early. It's not what that's arriving today. It's actually a steering wheel. So I went ahead, and I think I've discussed this on the show before, and went all in on that Gran Turismo 7 package for PSVR 2. Got a steering wheel with the pedals and everything to go alongside the headset. So very excited for that. The real test that will be when the headset comes. That's going to be sometime next week, of course, 22nd. But we'll talk more on PSVR maybe at the end here when we get to that state of play, as you can see on the docket. But we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to continue moving on here. I just wanted to make sure I didn't have to pause my show here for that. But you know what? I may actually go grab that, because we're gonna have a huge package on my front doorstep. So I may do that in the next 5 minutes here. I'll finish up the story. I think I'll take like a 30-second break, just bring that inside my house. So don't have to worry about that getting taken or anything like that. Knock on wood here. Hopefully that wouldn't be the case. But we're gonna see here, of course, as I said, with this marketing campaign, it continued on for the Super Bowl. Again, we'll get through this story. Almost done with this story here. We saw a Blizzard and Midgard tease. So I'll get down to the post here, what they're talking about. This was via a PlayStation Canada. Again, very much like those other news broadcasts in the trailer. We saw this Mjolnir, Thor's hammer here, of course, in the snow. Looks like on the field at the big game. They said Fimbulwinter at the big game. So, could this be the Winter Ragnarok? So people were saying, could this be, God of War news? Do we get New Game Plus news or a DLC even? That was the big rumor. I wasn't never convinced with that. And again, like I said, it's convenient for me now to say this since my show is late on Monday and go, oh, like hindsight is 2020. But I did not think we were going to get a whole new God of War, announcement or DLC announcement. I thought maybe them just saying, hey, God of War is on PS5, since November. It's still a big game. It's, it's had huge sales. So them just reminding people it exists, I thought maybe it would be more likely. If anything, if not just continuation of this marketing campaign. I did think maybe, the New Game Plus rumor was really just out of left field. Not that I didn't think New Game Plus was a possibility. In fact, I thought, some people had some interesting predictions. Maybe, we'll just talk about God of War at the game, and then you'll see a PlayStation blog post on Monday with New Game Plus drops. So, I could see that any week now. Absolutely. I don't think that was out of the question, but to throw like New Game Plus on screen at the Super Bowl, I didn't really think that was convincing to me. There's millions of ways that people are going to go, what the heck is New Game Plus on God of War? I don't think that was probably the best strategy. So yeah, I didn't think that was going to happen. That being said, what we did get here, and I will show this actually comes via PlayStation Canada on Instagram here, was a little real. So there's their little God of War from a Winter, tease. This is our answer here. But this, like I said, did not air during the Super Bowl. I was looking forward to seeing it. Unfortunately, we did not get this in the U.S. airing of the Super Bowl like I predicted. But that being said, we get it on here on Instagram. So again, no audio, so I might as well just play it anyway. This is King Bach here. I'm not sure if maybe my younger audience members may remember him, but he was big on Vine, I believe. Social media back like almost 10 years ago. I want to say when that happened. So that's why I remember King Bach. But cool to see him on this news broadcast here with Sony. But then again, you see all these, this montage here from that previous ad that we just saw. All the games at the end there, and of course, it all started off with, as you just saw, kind of reminds me of that old kind of the old Coca-Cola commercials here in the tunnel, like you think me, Joe Green, the kid in the tunnel. I'm not sure. Maybe this is me aging myself now a little bit, but we have Kratos and Atreus here run by, so it kind of gives that old Super Bowl commercial kind of feel. So I do like what they did here to kind of coincide with the Super Bowl. Then again, even if this was a 15-second spot, three again, it's still 3.5 million, I guess, but I think it would have served Sony well to at least let us run really quickly during the Super Bowl and let everybody in the US see that commercial. But hey, that's just me. I'm not sure what's going on there, the marketing here, but I think it was a really cool ad. So hats off to Sony for that. That being said, I am going to bump up to our next story and actually take that quick break here. I will be right back in about a minute or so. I'm going to put us on the be right back screen if you guys don't mind. And we will come back with that E3 story as you see in the docket. So bear with me here and I'll be right back in a brief minute. All right. Thanks, guys. All right, guys, and we are back. I appreciate you bearing with me there. I grabbed my package. We're all secure here, all good. I realized I left my coffee from earlier outside my office here, so I grabbed my coffee as well, and we're all back to get right back on this docket and get back into the news here with you guys. So I'm going to pull up our next story here. As I mentioned before the break, we got some news on E3 this summer. Very interesting. Of course, you guys may remember E3 has been a little bit on what's the word here? The back burner, I guess you could say here with COVID, with everything that went on. Of course, E3 was canceled in person, during 2020. And we've been kind of dealing with the reverberations of that ever since. Of course, friend of mine, Jeff Keighley, of course, we love Jeff Keighley's Summer Games Fest. Of course, the Video Game Awards. That being said, he kind of has taken a bit of that empty seat there that E3 left, in its void when everything happened during 2020. They really weren't able to recover for 2021 summer, and that's how we saw Summer Game Fest really become the premier kind of E3 showcase slot, if you will, that we always expected during that early June, time. So it has been a bit interesting, few years for PlayStation showcases, I was going to say, at the Xbox developer directs, Nintendo directs, of course. It's been a bit of like a shakeup as we've seen the big three here, as I like to say, Xbox, Nintendo, PlayStation, kind of do their own thing. Of course, we saw third parties and other big, publishers and things like, going on at Game Fest. There's a lot going on this last summer, so I don't want to say that it wasn't, what we expected. It was more so in a hybrid format, in a lot of different, we saw a lot of different smaller showcases. One day we got a few announcements here, a few announcements there. We saw some really cool stuff. I loved Day of the Devs, some of the indie showcases we had last summer. We got these almost like a week long of just constant announcements, like you would expect from an E3 kind of week. So not to say that magic was gone there, but of course the E3 magic itself was gone. And now that we're back this summer, E3 is back to stay. They said we're coming back. At Reed Pop, who I believe runs the E3 commission, I may be mistaken here, at least at this point in time. So we'll read through the article here before I, misinterpret anything here. They have said that it's still holding the conference this summer. They're going to have it be convenient for both press and consumers. So in the past, I want to say, really going back like 20, 30 years in the past, E3 had traditionally been, only developers, publishers. Then as time went on, they started opening up to the floor to more consumers, showcases, the like. That being said, at a certain point, it was always a little bit of both. You had your behind closed doors showcases. A lot of, things went on during E3s that we weren't maybe aware of as consumers at the time, that were, maybe deals between companies, private demos of big games that then made, started deals between, maybe publishers and first party companies, things and the like, who knows? But there, people know, I shouldn't say who knows, but there's a lot of business that does go down at E3, but also reveals for the entire industry that not just impact, what us as consumers and people who play games look for, but also us as developers and people who make games, are looking for in terms of what's happening in the industry, looking ahead. So of course there's a ton of, history and nostalgia and historic value in the E3 showcases. And I only bring that up because of, I feel like I let off here with the kind of the uncertainty of what's happening. And I want to make sure that, I reiterate there has been a long history of E3's standing in this summer showcase. If you're not aware of that, maybe if you're new to following the games industry like this, E3 has been around for as long as I can remember, since I was very young, as little as like I want to say 7-8 years old, starting to read video game news and trying to figure out when the next Halo game is going to come out. When I was that young, I started looking up IGN, GameSpot, these websites we use on the show today, to give them a shout out for sure. And E3 was always the summer event to look forward to. When we got those new trailers, we saw the new games coming out in the fall. It's always been exciting. So it was a little bittersweet to see what I would call, I don't want to say the fall of E3, but very much the slump of E3 during COVID. What we saw was maybe the fall of E3 at the time. People said, will E3 ever come back? Will we ever see an in-person event ever again? That's the kind of thing we were talking about, during early COVID. Will we ever see any, people meet together, ever again to talk about games? That was kind of the way people were talking about it at that point. And now it's a slightly different conversation here. It's now that they're back, can they survive on their own without PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, maybe jumping back into their old ways here? So as I mentioned, it's been weird these past few years, but there's no commitment here that it's going to snap back to normal. We're going to have, go back to these huge, Los Angeles, press conference, level of events for all three of the big, console publishers. It seems that's not the case whatsoever. There's no indication here that they're coming back. We did get this statement here from from Phil Spencer of Xbox. He said, E3 is just to me one of the seminal moments of gaming, and I agree with that. Couldn't agree more. I love the history of going down to LA, thousands of people there, getting to see great new things, getting to see people in the industry, the fan events that we've had. I definitely want that to continue, he says. They continue here. Xbox is on the board of ESA, and I think a successful and healthy ESA is critical to what we're trying to do. So we place our showcase like we always have done at a time where hopefully it's convenient for press and even consumers that are going to E3 event, and that's what we're trying to do now. We'll continue to work with the ESA in terms of their plans, and as I said, we're on the board. We want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to make E3 successful. So this is very interesting coming from P3 here, Phil Spencer, in that, as I said before, they are not going to be at E3 this year. So you're wondering from the context of that quote, what is he saying here? As we reported on last episode, if you may remember, Xbox announced that they're going to have their own showcase this summer in LA, very similar, in a conference room, very much like an E3 showcase, just not during the time constraints of the E3 conference. Not exactly the same time. It's almost, I believe, exactly a week before. So I'm not sure exactly, where they're having this conference. I believe it might be in the exact same vicinity or in the same, convention center in LA. I may be mistaken. I'm not exactly sure where where their conference is being located so far in terms of all the different E3 conferences. I know they're they are a bit sporadic in terms of different theaters and different parts of the convention center, depending. That being all said, it's kind of interesting how Xbox is playing this hybrid approach here. Like, we still want to have our E3 showcase. We want all the hype, but we want to do it in our own way. So that they're still on the board here of the ESA. They're still helping to I'm sure there'll be a lot of announcements related to Xbox with third-party games and the like during the E3 week. But it seems like their main showcase, whatever's happening there, whether it's more Starfield, we're probably getting their own showcase for Starfield there. But whatever that is, it's happening. E3 adjacent, we should say. Speaking on Nintendo and PlayStation, of course, they have of this point no plans, to be at E3. We'll talk about later today what they may be doing later in the year, in lieu of an E3 appearance. Of course, we had that Nintendo Direct just this week with a lot of huge announcements and then some, games releasing before E3 even happens. So we look what's next for Nintendo, after all that, maybe we see something June time. And then PlayStation, of course, we may see something very imminent here as well, similar to Nintendo, similar to Xbox with the developer direct, in January. So it looks like we're all of the big three here are due for maybe a smaller conference and maybe a slightly bigger one, showcasing their fall and their major 2023 announcements closer to that June, maybe before June, that May-ish, E3 time. We'll see, to bounce around that E3 dates. That being said, that's about it for the rest of this article. I know there's a lot going on here that I didn't want to, take too long to delve into the weeds here with you guys. But that being said, I believe the ESA did give a statement at some point uh, from Reed Pop, who was overseeing, I believe, the ESA at this point. Here we go, right here. So I want to make sure I get this right. They said E3 is such a significant event for the game industry, and being entrusted with an important cultural touchstone is not a responsibility Reed Pop takes lightly. Since Reed Pop took on the contract to run E3 6 months ago, we worked diligently with ESA members based on their feedback to create a new type of E3 that supports their goals and needs. So that's a new type of E3. It's a very interesting statement there. What exactly that means, we don't know. But of course, it has to be some sort of new, given all the shakeups and all the the things that maybe expected in the past aren't really exactly happening this year. They said the process has taken some time, quote, due to the tremendous amount of stakeholders offering input, though we appreciate that we could have been more transparent to questions, which we're still finalizing the answers. We continue to work tirelessly to create a show that brings together the global gaming industry. We believe we've created a new format for the event that serves both the needs of the industry and its fans, and are committed to building and growing it in the coming years. As we spent much of 2022 refining how E3 2023 would take shape, reflecting on the feedback we solicited, we did not send a single contract to an exhibitor until the start of this month. Excuse me, which is very interesting, and I want to say probably concerning. I want to say it sounds like a good thing. We've been taking all of 2022 to make sure we were perfect in our plans, and now I get the way they're trying to phrase that. That does sound a little concerning. That we're less than maybe 6 months until this the biggest conference in the world, in the world when it comes to gaming historically, and we have not a single commitment from anything. All of the small scale booze announcements, everything on the show floor to the large scale announcements and game drops and big publishers. That's slightly concerning. There's nothing on the board because that the Summer Games Fest and Jeff Keighley and the Game Awards and all that team is working year round. I'm sure they have some connections going on for summer already here. They have that huge, that concert going on with I think it's the London Philharmonic Orchestra. I may be mistaken there. The history of gaming concerts. They're really like firing on all cylinders there, it seems. And then you have what is, the legacy kind of, organization, or the legacy, convention being E3 with a new, organization, Reed Pop, overseeing the ESAs, functioning this year. It's a little concerning. And I don't want to say, anything bad here, or it's bad, but it's concerning. So, that's all I'll say. And I'm really hoping, to put it in a more positive light here, I'm really hoping that they can really pull this off. Because look, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here. I'm not trying to say it's, E3 is doomed or whatever, but it doesn't have a lot of cards working for it right now. It doesn't have, PlayStation, Xbox, or Nintendo really participating in its conference. It doesn't have, the writing on the wall here. It has a lot stacked up against it. With these big platforms moving either elsewhere, taking on their own showcases. Going to Summer Game Fest and other other showcases. It is concerning. I really hope that E3, whether it is the E3 we always knew, whether it even can be that anymore, I hope it can find some sort of footing. I don't know if it could be that anymore. I think it might have to be more so kind of like smaller. I want to say smaller. I want to use a smaller showcase, but more so of a social showcase, a show floor, game demos, things, bring back what I guess wasn't really the traditional E3 showcase for consumers, but really make it more of a consumer facing event where you have those behind closed door meetings, but you also have this huge showcase floor for consumers, fans, people in the industry to meet each other, to kind of convene in a real convention way, more of a Comic-Con centered, type way, versus E3 being a little more centered on events and a little more centered on waiting on lines for certain demos and showcases. And again, I have not been to E3 in person, so I can't speak. And this is just me speaking, off the top of my head here. So take that all with a grain of salt. But I do think that it is tough when you have all this heavy competition. So I hope for their sake that they could find a spot, whether it is with that nostalgia or being the center of video game discourse, whatever it could be. I really hope. I think E3 is such a historic. Just I wouldn't be fond of living in in a video game cycle where E3 was no more. That would be a shame, I think. So hopefully they could pull it off in a great way. I hope there's a room for everybody here, but we'll see how it goes this summer. We'll see the way things plan out. With the big three, the major showcases, Summer Games Fest, the like. Unfortunately, we have a bit more not so amazing news here as I switch over. We have some big delays. Of course, our biggest probably game of March, being Jedi Survivor. Unfortunately delayed here. I'm going to pull that up on Twitter in just a second. This comes courtesy of EA Star Wars over on Twitter. And of course, you see The Last of Us PC. Not as concerning. I believe it's actually delayed to when Jedi Survivor, excuse me, or around when Jedi Survivor was, excuse me, around March 17th. We'll get to that in a second, though. Jedi Survivor, of course, is coming out, I believe, on March. It doesn't matter now because it's delayed, but mid-March here. So I'll read this statement from the team, actually. So we saw here for the last 3 years, the Jedi team at Respawn has poured its collective heart and soul into Star Wars Jedi Survivor. We are proud to say the next chapter in the tale of Cal Kestis is content complete. So good to hear. Again, they're now, focused on probably bug fixing here, of course, and on the final stage of bug fixes, enhancing performance, stability, polish, and most importantly, the player experience. Jedi Survivor is a direct response to the feedback from our community, delivering expansive destinations to explore, evolved combat and traversal, and of course, the continuation of Cal and BD's story. Making this game has made us a better team, truly made us a better team, and we have pushed ourselves at every level to make this a Star Wars sequel our fans expect from Respawn and Lucasfilm Games. In order for the team to hit the Respawn quality bar, to provide the team the time they need and achieve the level of polish our fans deserve, we've added 6 crucial weeks to our release schedule. Star Wars Jedi Survivor will now launch globally on April 28th. Not that long, not August. Thanks to EA and Respawn for giving us this time to deliver the best experience for our players and all of you for understanding. May the Force be with you. Signed, the Stig and the Star Wars Jedi team. So very nice message there from them. I'm not, a little bummed. Of course, I was excited to play this in March, but no way here disappointed. It seems like I'm very happy here. It seems like they're close to going gold, if not almost, finished, right at the finish line here, all in that bug fixing, polishing stage. Hopefully that's the case. They said, again, 6 weeks more here to kind of polish everything out. That seems like a really smart move. If it is really that the case there where it is just bug fixes and polishing, I'm having a little bit of a tongue twister here today. Bug fixes and polishing there. I imagine that a few weeks is probably all they needed. I think 6 weeks giving them a little bit of buffer there to really, really polish that, and solidify it and not to worry as much. Sounds like a smart move. So again, as much as I'd want to play that game as soon as I possibly can, the more I read on that, the more I'm excited for that game. The more we hear of that it is that, that sequel. It's been 3 years in development, and how much I enjoyed the first game. And I had my own, it had its quirks and some of my issues with that first game. It feels like they've addressed all of that, if not more. So, it's really cool to see. I think, sequels a lot of times, get a bad rap. I think we got that with God of War Ragnarok, where the trailer came out and you got some people online saying, this looks like the first game, or this looks like 2018. And I was thinking, no, it's a sequel. I'm not sure what we're really expecting here. It was everything I expected from a sequel. It took everything that first game did well, refined it, expanded on it, grew on it, added more, and made it feel like that real, fully, fleshed out, incredibly, expansive title. So I think that, sequels many times could be the epitome of what is the best version of that game. I think of a lot of games now for PlayStation, especially. I hate to be so PlayStation centric, today. There's a lot on the docket for them, though. You have Jedi, not Jedi. We have Ghost of Tsushima, the sequel for that coming out soon, which will be really great to see that first game expanded on in a PS5 sense. Same thing with Spider-Man. That first game was awesome. Had little quirks and things that I maybe want to improve on. And now to see that game, all the feedback on that game, plus on PS5 with all the horsepower, things got exciting. So thinking more about Jedi Survivor and how that game kind of struggled on PS4 Pro performance-wise a bit, still really, what had a lot going on for it. My main gripes being like some things with feedback and, running back to your ship. They've already addressed it. There's mounts in this game. There's tauntauns, there's fast travel. There's new lightsaber moves, every little thing I could probably think of that was like a minor gripe with the first game, I've already heard them address in the pre-release, discussion for this game. And I've already been excited for things that I thought of that are even more expansive than I would have even thought of. So all good here for me. Of course, it's a bummer to hear about a delay, but I didn't want this to be some sort of bad news corner here on the docket. I do think that, it's good to hear this game is still on track to deliver in the spring here, at least, this spring, and still, come out with great quality. So I'm happy for it. I'm excited. Hopefully the delay serves them well. And speaking of that, of course, I won't speak much more on delays here because it's the same kind of attitude I have going into The Last of Us PC. Of course, I actually we do have this on PlayStation already, of course. Before the HBO show release, we got this release. I was looking forward to this because it's releasing on March 3rd, which is actually my birthday. That being said, it's delayed here to March 28th, so not as long of a delay, I guess, as the Jedi Survivor, but pretty close in length there. So March 28th, around the end of March, we're gonna be getting this Last of Us Part 1 on PC. I actually did get to play Last of Us Part 1, this remaster new, on PS5 very briefly. I mentioned on the show, actually, they had a free trial. If you were PlayStation Premium member, you could play 2 hours free. So I downloaded it. I played the first 2 hours, so I was getting the itch to play after watching the HBO show. It's definitely, I think, fantastic. I have a hard time saying anything negative about it whatsoever because it was just probably the best looking game on PS5 right now to date. And maybe there's a caveat there, it being a remake of an older title. But that being said, still, it's something I was saying about Last of Us Part 2 probably, recently, even though it's still a PlayStation 4 application. It was remarkable how much that game pulled, out of the PlayStation 4 Pro, pretty much to its limits. Naughty Dog really, knows the ins and outs of the PlayStation hardware, and that's very apparent in The Last of Us Part 2, and now The Last of Us Part 1 built for PS5. It's really, it's something else how well that game performed. That being said, if you want it on a PC and probably push that a little further with some PC and performance enhancements and the like on your PC rig, you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer here, unfortunately. But that being said, I can already, again, it's a PC port here. I can't vouch exactly for the PC port, but I can definitely vouch for the PlayStation version. It plays great. It's incredible if you're on PC. I just wish you guys could play this, while the show's still going on. Of course, we have a few more weeks here. I think 3-4 more episodes left. It's getting really good as well this weekend, I will say. Not to go too much off tangent here, but Last of Us HBO, I'll say that now since it's the only relevant story. Definitely would recommend watching as a fan of the game. Definitely diverts a bit in certain parts, but especially this last episode, the way I will say certain chaotic things happen with the clickers and the zombies. They play it a little bit differently in the show, but I think they're even more terrifying. And this is somebody who's, if you guys know me on the show, I'm not the biggest horror person. I enjoy horror stuff, but I'm not looking to get scared or jump scares. I don't go out and watch like The Exorcist and movies like that. I'm not a big horror guy per se, but I do love, my great, storytelling, and I love The Last of Us. So I think it's been awesome on the TV show. I definitely recommend watching if you're a fan of the games, and vice versa. If you've been enjoying that and you have a PC, it is kind of a bummer that you can't do like the kind of watch and play, watch along thing that some people have been doing, kind of, going alongside and comparing and contrasting each week, which is pretty cool. But then again, if it's your first time watching and you haven't played Part 1 ever before, maybe it is, there's some silver lining there that you're not going to get spoiled, or you don't go too far in the game, vice versa. So you'll watch the show and you get the opportunity to play it in the game form right after. So still, either way, pretty cool stuff. But if you're excited for that, you'll have to wait a little bit longer later in March. But time's flying here. It'll be here soon enough, hopefully. That being said, I'm going to move on. We have a ton more to talk about here, and we're still we're still pushing through the docket here, guys. So I want to keep us moving along. That being said, we're gonna move over here to a bit more on PSVR. As I mentioned, it was there somewhere in the docket. I didn't want to talk too much on it earlier, but I did want to mention what was relevant there. That being said, we're going to go quickly through this story because it's a bit of a non-story, I will say. Maybe 50-50, maybe it was, and kind of I'll get into why I say that, but I'm going to take a quick coffee break here, as I feel like I've been talking to your guys' ear off for a bit. We got a lot more to cover, and we'll get right into that. Anyways, here, as you've probably read already, if you're watching on video, if not, I'll of course, talk you through it here. We see that, courtesy of Bloomberg here, Sony slashes PlayStation VR 2 headset output after pre-orders disappoint, end quote. So I see this end quote. I kind of say this allegedly because Sony actually combats this later on. We'll get into what they had to say in response. But via Bloomberg here, we see because of high price being seen as a limiting factor, kind of a niche market here. With the price, the marketing here maybe not showing enough. We're seeing a low pre-order number here for PlayStation VR 2, sluggish demand, yeah, and that's courtesy of Bloomberg here. I'm not sure what exactly their source is, but we see Sony Group Corp reduced productions for the initial launch of its PlayStation VR 2 headset dramatically after early pre-orders disappointed, signaling little improvement for the hyped but unproven virtual reality sector. The company halved its forecast of shipments to the PSVR 2, which is set for a February 2022 release, which I am purchasing myself. I'll have some thoughts on the Endless Report for sure. That being said, the company have its forecast. They said here. Again, I'm wondering where the sources of this information. We hear that the according to the people, the supply partner, that's apparently talking to Bloomberg here, has asked not to be named as the information is not public. Of course, the company now plans to ship around 1.5 million units between April and March next year. They added, though that figure may be adjusted further in response to demand. So I'm guessing maybe they anticipated maybe 3 million units before this, or maybe it's a little even smaller. Maybe it is 0.75 million. I'm not sure exactly the metric there, if that was the expected metric or that was the expected metric of 1.5 million. It seems to be the latter. That being said, Sony shares erased gains after the news in Tokyo Tuesday, ending today just below where they started. Again, not too concerned about their stock, their market performance really here. This more so is just, of course, Bloomberg reporting on the metrics here of the market, but I am more concerned here whether or not this is true, whether or not the actual pre-order numbers are low. That's really what we're concerned about here from this report. That being said, I did mention earlier, of course, that Sony denied this. So this comes via IGN here. We have Sony denies reports of PSVR 2 production being slashed. And I said it before, take this with a grain of salt. And I'm going to say this as well. Take this with a grain of salt, with a grain of salt, because it makes sense, of course, if this was true and it not being public information. Of course, Sony would have wanted to be public. They'd want to combat that. They want to say that's not true. Don't listen to that. Then again, if this could easily be just misleading information as well. And if I was Sony, I would very much, reasonably, be of the prerogative to say, hey, this is absolutely not true. We're on track here. So, of course, it could be, either, I have to, just make that assumption myself as someone I don't have the source here. It's an anonymous source. I don't want to just play devil's advocate and go, we can't believe anything, guys. Of course, I want to be able to, give you an assumption here. I would say I'm leaning towards it being true just because it seems slightly likely. Again, I'm not sure. I'm obviously a person who has purchased a PSVR, so I'm not in that camp in terms of not believing in it. I'm obviously in the camp of I've been a big proponent of VR in the past. I understand, at least personally, the niche, the niche marketing of it. I understand that it has been a bit of a fad in certain people's eyes. Then again, people who aren't the VR, people who are aware of the market, and people, I think I'm one of these people. I've bought in. I think long term, maybe right now, I'm not thinking PSVR 2. Maybe it's gonna be the revolution of VR or anything like that. I'm not expecting it to be the pinnacle of a turning point for the technology. Maybe it is. Who knows? But I wasn't really going in with that much of an expectation. I do understand, that it's not the biggest, most highest selling type of product. You really need to invest a lot of money in not just, the product itself, but in the developers to build these games for the product and really sell it and send it home there. I'm not sure if PlayStation is really, really invested hugely in a way that could be, again, maybe risky even feeling for them, which is probably the way they need to invest if they want us to really take hold of the market. That being said, I do think it is enough where it's going to be maybe a surprise hit where people are like, yeah, it's another VR headset. Xbox isn't even doing it. Nintendo's not even doing it. They have the Labo. They have some stuff going on there. But, is this competing with really, right now, it's really like competing with Meta and the Meta Quest, the Quest Pro to an extent, but more so the wireless, lines. And I think coming in with a really high powered, what is basically a above $1,000 spec'd, VR headset for $500 retail, there's room here for PlayStation to really, come in big with some huge games under the radar and have, the public not really adopt it as crazily at the beginning, but the media and the reviews go, whoa, check out this device. This is incredible. You've never seen anything like this. We've heard reports, and this is true apparently, that a game, Pavlov, is a shooter on PC right now, is apparently running 10% faster on the PSVR 2 setup than the best rigs running on a PC right now with 3090 Ti's in their rigs on VR, which again, it almost sounds hyperbolic, it almost sounds not true, but people are saying that that the base PS5 PSVR 2 performance of that game, that shooter, is 10% better than the highest little PC you can even have running it right now. That's saying something. That's pretty impressive. Those of you in the PC camp may be going, what are you talking about there? Of course, the PS5 isn't more powerful than, the most powerful PC on the market right now. That's not what we're saying here, but then again, you had to consider here we have the power of the PSVR 2 added on top of that here. You have the PS5's power, of course, and then you have the real kicker here, which is really why this is the case, the optimization factor. This isn't a one size fits all for every rig, every configuration, whatever headset you're using with that rig. This is a specific console made application there. The developer finished just for the PS5, just for this PSVR 2 headset, optimized as best they could for this single setup. And that's why you get better performance. You have better optimization for the hardware. And you may be head scratcher going, wait a minute, this is actually performing better. And then again, I'm going to wait till it's season. I may have to pick up that game Pavlov myself just to check that out and see how well the game performs. I don't have a reference frame there. I have tried out actually a good amount of PC VR headsets in the past. I don't own any currently, but I've tried the Steam Index, the HTC Vive, the Oculus Rift, a few versions of Oculus actually. I was very privileged to be able to take a VR class in college, which was incredible. Shout out to Professor Grimfeder, King Grimfeder. He taught an amazing class, on interactive media, on programming design. We were able to make games in Unity and even films with 360 cameras that you could then import to VR headsets and be able to test it out. So I not only got to be able to create content and some 360 films as well as a game in VR in university. I also got to try out a ton of VR headsets that we had at our disposal in the VR room at school. So it was a really, really cool experience there. It gave me a picture of where VR was at the time that maybe was more so a niche thing that only people who were playing with PC headsets really understood. As someone who had only tried, the Google Cardboard and cell phone headsets at the time, it was really a step up. So it was really cool to try that, during my class there in college. And I'm really excited to try it out for myself now. That Gran Turismo game, I mentioned it about 3 times already on the Endless Report here over various episodes. But that with the steering wheel, it's going to be really, really something else. I think it's going to be a game changer for, no pun intended there, for virtual reality. So that being said, whether or not this is true here, whether or not Sony has reduced their production, I do think, even if they weren't, I do think they do need to ramp up the marketing here, maybe invest a little more money in some more games. I want to see more announcements. I want to see Ghost of Tsushima experience. You're swinging the sword around. They have that Spider-Man and Iron Man VR experiences that already exist for PS4. We need to see a new version of those. Insomniac's making that Spider-Man, of course, making Spider-Man this fall. If we can get some sort of, VR swinging around experience, there's a lot of things here that could really make themselves. I think MLB The Show. This is one thing I saw. I'm trying to think who I did not mention this myself, so I got to give credit. This is not my original idea here. Someone on a podcast had mentioned this to have a home run derby game. We saw it with NFL Pro Era, which looks awesome, coming with some improvements on PS5 here and PSVR 2 from the MetaQuest. We have that quarterback game where you're in the pocket, you make your own plays. Just like a Madden, you're calling the plays and you're throwing. I want to see MLB The Show make something. MLB The Show is still the best baseball game in the market, in my opinion, the best sports game on the market, period. I mean, I love, Madden, FIFA, we all, love our sports games here, but then again, production wise, Madden's had a lot of, scandals this year, unfortunately, losing all their players' save files over, months and months and months of Madden Ultimate Team and career modes gone down the drain. There's been a lot of issues in terms of them just recycling older mechanics. So, people have had their issues with, with the sports games, of course, just unfortunately, not having, the biggest updates. And I think MLB The Show is really the outlier there and the one game that should be, commended for. I think Sony Santa Monica, produces a really high quality product there, incredible graphics. Very happy that's on Xbox now as well. So everybody on Xbox can at least play, I think that is a game that, as much as it's a great product made by Sony, that it makes more sense for them to have it on Xbox. And it just makes sense for everyone, to be able to play. A game like baseball, I think it just should be everywhere. It's one of those things where, again, I don't know if the show can even run on Nintendo platforms, but Xbox, PC, PlayStation for sure, if possible. I think the show should be there. But again, I digress here. I'm on a bit of a tangent. A VR experience, I think, is a no-brainer for them. All they got to do is, again, there's a lot going on there in terms of motion controls, getting that in first person. But if they could figure that out and get a dedicated team there, like something like Gran Turismo, it's just such a great example of how it is an existing game. We saw the team in No Man's Sky do this as well. You're flying around spaceships, you're walking around in first person and third person. So that's a game that's a very high profile third party game, fully converted their controller game into a full VR experience that you can still play multiplayer with people on controller. That's quite something. That's pretty impressive. So I think if they could pull something like that off with, a game, any of those Sony exclusives, it's the show, a sword game for Ghost of Tsushima, your samurai with your, I mean, it's a no-brainer there. There's a ton of stuff you can do here. I think Call of Duty, of course, with that whole Activision deal, it's probably a shot in the dark there. But a Call of Duty, experience, of course, we're gonna get that with, we have Firewall Ultra here. We have that game Pavlov. There's a lot of Navy SEAL type, like special ops shooter type games coming to the VR as well. So that'll kind of fit that niche. So maybe not Call of Duty or anything like that, but it remains to be seen. We'll see how Horizon Call of the Mountain performs. It's the big blockbuster PSVR launch game here. Is really supposed to be proving the headset. We'll look at that. We'll look at Gran Turismo, but I'll talk more on that later when I get the headset myself. So I'll move on for now because we'll have a lot more to talk about on later episodes here anyway. So speaking of that, we're going to move on to our next article here. So I will switch over our docket, and we have a new racing game actually here, a new The Crew from Ubisoft. So speaking of Gran Turismo and the racing wheel and all that, we have a brand new The Crew courtesy of IGN here. We got I'm not sure this is IGN first, but I believe this was an exclusive article from them, and this is called The Crew Motorfest, taking the series to Hawaii. Very interesting. So if you're not familiar with The Crew, at least the first two games, it was a very interesting idea and a really, really novel and cool idea at the time, where the crew spanned the entire continental United States. So theoretically, you're able to drive from LA to, up to Seattle, all the way across the country to Chicago, to New York, to Miami, to go to Austin, Texas. You can go in a circle around the entire continental United States, wherever you wanted to go. I'm sure it was a bit condensed on that map. Unfortunately, I haven't played The Crew myself. I can't vouch for it, but I had seen some gameplay, and it was a really slight condensed, I'm sure, version of the entire U.S., which is a really cool concept. You can, especially for an open world driving game, you can drive wherever. Very cool. But it seems here for the sequel, they're bringing us all the way to Hawaii, and what makes me think here is that, since it isn't the entire continental U.S., it's not from New York to San Francisco, I'm sure it'll be a much more realistic sense of Hawaii, because that old map, as I imagine, was probably a huge map. I imagine here, since this is another huge map on top of that, and it being only the islands of Hawaii, I imagine they'll be able to make a much more real, to scale, realistic version of the islands. And I'm not sure exactly, we'll have to wait and see exactly how they'll pull that off. But imagine if you're a native of Hawaii or have been to Hawaii, I'm sure this will be a really cool game to see, a fully fledged Hawaii map. I'm not sure many other games have done Hawaii as a setting. So very cool idea here. We have an announcement trailer as well, where probably the suspicion there. So I'll let that run for a second as we look at the article. That being said, it's a return to the setting of 2006's highly influential Test Drive Unlimited, which is a very interesting headline here. It says, and it also makes the Crew Motorfest a potentially fascinating return to that setting, a pioneering MMO-inspired racer from the developer of Eden Games that laid the foundation of the genre today, this open-world MMO racer that we now know that the Crew kind of plays off of. I'm going to pause that trailer for a second, but it says, this link shouldn't be regarded as an accident. However, the Test Drive Unlimited is actually a crucial part of the Crew's non-Ubisoft related roots. Ivory Tower, the studio, was founded by former Eden Games developers, so that makes sense here, including Test Drive Unlimited game director Stefan Bailey, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Bailey, senior creative director at Ivory Tower, seems well aware of the links longtime racing fans are likely to make between the two games. So very cool to see like that kind of heritage of that old, game studio there, then bring forward, this old setting and bring it back into their new game series, The Crew. Also pretty cool that the Ubisoft teams were able to, do that, I guess, legally, the rights to their old game. I guess it's Hawaii. It's not like it's a fictional setting. So it's not like you can't use Hawaii or anything like that, but the fact that they're directly linking it to Test Drive Unlimited, they're stating that in the media and the press releases, I think that's pretty cool to to give a nod and that respect to and let the developers respect their their roots and their older racing games. So I like that a lot. I'm gonna let that trailer play on top of that as well, so we can see a bit more of this Hawaii setting, and hopefully I can rewind this here so that buffering isn't controlling the whole trailer for us. But very cool to see here that they've leaned into their roots there. I wasn't aware of that actually. I started reading that just now, so I think it's a very cool nod. We see the Ford Bronco there, new Lamborghini. I always forget the name of that Lamborghini truck, but very, very cool truck. My question is always if you could, I might as well get a Lamborghini if I'm gonna get that, a car at that price. But very, very cool. trailer, very, very brief. Again, the Crew Motorfest is the title. Well, that's this year. So again, presumably fall 2023. We don't have any quarter there, any info, but we have some registration. Of course, we see for some sort of beta tests, test phase that we'll have, which is very cool as well. If you want to get on the testing there, you can go sign up, I guess, on the bottom of that trailer. That being said, I always leave our links here. If you're watching on recording, we'll have links to everything I'm talking about here in the description if you want to go check all that good stuff out. That being said, I am going to move on from the Crew here. That's about all I have to say on that. And we have a bit of a long show today, so I want to make sure we can finish around 2:30 here today. So I'm going to keep pressing on the docket here. So moving on to our next story, we're going back actually to Insomniac Games. Not speaking about Spider-Man this time. I've been very excited. Excuse me. For that title, but we're going back here to Wolverine, actually. A game I didn't think we'd be speaking on much for a while here, but I'm going to take a quick coffee break as we pull that up here on the docket. So as you can see here, we have the gamer saying Insomniac Games is reportedly aiming for an R rating in fall 2024 release for Wolverine. So of course, you very well may know that in gaming we don't have R ratings like in movies. It would be an M, M for mature, or maybe even adult, which is the very exceedingly rare AO rating, which is the adult only content, which is usually is only reserved for like not suitable. What's the word? NSFW content or things. You rarely see a traditional, like mature violent game like Call of Duty or traditional typical blockbuster release get all the way on that. Like it's more suited for like risque kind of adult content usually that I see. I believe in a God of War game at some point maybe had an AO rating. I want to check if I'm mistaken there. I think that was something back in the day. I remember that being like one of the only high profile AO that was almost an AO release that had to be then probably contested. So it could be it wasn't because released in that format here. That being said, I digress. Just me kind of nerding about video game ratings here. Getting back to the actual news here, we get this. What we've been talking about a lot on the Wolverine game is that it's most likely going to be a gritty, more M-rated game versus the PlayStation Spider-Man releases, which have been T for teen. So as we get into this here, we of course that rumored fall 2024 release seems more and more likely. Just knowing Insomniac and knowing how crazy fast their output times are. I talked about this a lot in the past. We already got in Spider-Man Remastered, Miles Morales, and Ratchet and Clank in this generation from them already. That's 2 years into the PS5. We're already at Spider-Man PS5 from them this fall. Of course, Wolverine is completely a separate team. It's the Miles Morales team who has worked largely separate from the main, Spider-Man PS4 team that's coming out with Spider-Man 2 this fall. So they're all, full steam ahead on this Wolverine game. Nothing to do with Spider-Man now. We're not waiting for that to like wrap up development or anything like that. I'm sure maybe when that does, and some of them are still working on DLC and expansions for that game down the road. Maybe some of them will branch off and start helping Wolverine full time. I'm not sure exactly how the studio manages that stuff there, but that would make some sense. Like we see in other studios kind of migrating slowly, these hybrid release schedules as you move team members over to the new big project. That being said, I'm not really scrolling through the article here because it's really all a rumor here. That this is something that there's no source here. This is all taken over to greatest all. The source here is another Twitter rumor mill kind of thing here. So I don't want to give this off as too much fact here, but it does seem like a lot of these rumors have been slightly tangible here. These do seem pretty on target, and I will say I'm pretty happy about that. I do think for a Wolverine game, if you're not gonna have, and not that I'm just looking for the most goriest or whatever experience with but I do think if you're gonna have a Wolverine game and you have the claws, I think of back to X-Men Origins. That Wolverine title was a game I played back on the PS3. I want to say I was like 10 years old when that game came out. But that game was pretty crazy. You would be fighting through enemies as Wolverine. When you get damaged, what you would see like Wolverine's like rib cage and all these huge scars. Because of course, if you know Wolverine, he has the adamantium skeleton, and every time he gets damaged, he immediately resorbs and heals himself right on the spot. So you would see yourself, through combat encounters, the more damage you got, the more shots you took, the more hits you took, the more damage you would see on your character. And then you slowly see that giant, bone on your shoulder remorph and all the skin grow back. And it was kind of weird looking, kind of crazy for a PS3 game mechanic, but the fact that it worked that well, it was a really cool mechanic and it really fit the character. And I think a way where if you're going to make a really cool Wolverine game, you kind of have to go all out and have the, that's his whole, MO. It's kind of his claws, his regeneration effect. You kind of have to do that in the right way. And I do think that whereas in a Spider-Man game, you can kind of get away with, of course, you're not really being too violent. It's violent combat to an extent, but there's not, blood or gore. Spider-Man isn't really, super a violent superhero. He's really just trying to stop the villains. Maybe that changes with the new game and Venom. There's a lot of storylines in the comics of, Spider-Man accidentally killing or not pulling his punches because of Venom and all the, we've heard that's a dark storyline here. So maybe we see an M rating on Spider-Man, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's such a big, high-profile character. As much as I'd want maybe a little more grittier storylines there, and adult stuff, I do think that Spider-Man's such a high-profile. He is the superhero for kids and everyone and just everybody everywhere. I think that's a T for teen game. I don't see them bumping up to the M rating just because of, if anyone could do it, maybe it is Spider-Man because parents maybe will still buy it because it is the Spider-Man game. But again, I think they want to avoid that M rating. They want to make that as accessible for everyone. So I think maybe they save that for Wolverine here and really get it, kind of a gritty, hardened Wolverine game that we're maybe expecting. I think that'd be really cool. Of course, the other big notice in the headline here, the rumor is fall 2024. Like I said before, with Insomniac's turnaround times, the fact that this team isn't even working on Spider-Man 2 for this fall, I don't think that's crazy at all to say. I think, in fact, it's really reasonable. Just knowing, again, knowing what Insomniac can do, I have a lot of faith in them. I almost want to knock on wood because I don't want to jinx it, but they've proven themselves to be able to turn around incredibly high quality products in pretty short time periods with insane quality, polish. And I hate to say, when we live in a world now where AAA releases oftentimes come out with a day one patch as a necessary requirement, there's rarely a game that comes out that is really polished and really ready to go day one. Of course, Insomniac isn't perfect to a T with that. They have their day one patches as well, but they really have been consistently shipping games that aren't maybe broken in the sense that almost every other, I feel like, AAA release these days is in some capacity. And I hate to say that, but it oftentimes is the case. And they've been really, really consistent with, putting out quality, very minimal bug fix type, at the beginning, releases where they really do take their time and polish. So I have faith here. I'm going to move on again, as we have a lot more to talk about there. As you see, we have 4 more stories to get through here, but super excited for that. I think, again, it's another example there of a really cool VR experience of Wolverine running around. I'm sure that'd be really cool as well. But again, I move on here. We're going to get back to our next story, but seems like it could be a lot of cool stuff. So we'll keep an eye on the Wolverine game there as we get into our next story here. But I'm going to do really, really briefly on this one because this actually comes via Take-Two as well as actually Disney. This was a recurring story, unfortunately, in the past few weeks. There were a ton of layoffs in the industry, not just entertainment and tech, but I guess really, at tech as a whole. And I should have said really not just gaming, but really the entire tech industry, entire entertainment industry. Now we see Take-Two here looking at over a $50 million cost reduction program, which includes laying off a large portion of their employees, unfortunately. That being said, again, I'm not going to click on the article here. Like I said before, I'm going to keep this very, very brief as I don't have much to talk about here. Speaking on Take-Two, just very briefly, I do think this is somewhat concerning for them, maybe for, their future releases with Grand Theft Auto, with 2K, but I don't think this is much, to be concerned in terms of delaying any projects or anything like that. Not at all. This is more so, unfortunately, as much as this affects many real people and probably many really talented and awesome developers and other, other employees of various companies within Take-Two. I'm sure this is probably Take-Two at a higher level. As I said here, it's a cost reduction program. They're cutting costs here to fund other future projects. If anything, it's probably helping them, to fund and get maybe some sort of new hiring practices out there for certain other projects, redistribute certain, money to certain things elsewhere. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing here, what they're restructuring, but I'm sure it's in reaction to whatever, their investors are looking forward towards, what their big plans here, what's under wraps that we as consumers and the public don't know about. There's a lot going on there. And of course, the big rumors this week and last week and every week, because it's Grand Theft Auto, have been GTA 6. When is that coming out? Maybe it's sooner than we're anticipating. Can it be as soon as next fall, 2025? Again, what we've seen there, I don't think it's out of the question. Again, of course, Red Dead Redemption released in 2018, but again, that's 2018. That's 5 years ago almost now. with no, mainline releases from Rockstar Games, it's not out of the realm of possibility to get an announcement this year. We even said it last fall. Could we get one before 2023, a trailer? Again, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility here. So keep an eye on Rockstar Games on Take-Two for sure. That being said, we also had layoffs at Disney this week. Unfortunately, I believe 7,000 employees are being laid off as I speak now from Disney. Very similar to the numbers at, we talked about Netflix and Microsoft and Amazon. I think a bunch of companies, unfortunately, in the last week or two with 10,000, 5,000, 8,000, very similar numbers. So it's just a very unfortunate month, I should say, time period for those working in the entertainment industry. And, our thoughts go out to everyone, suffering from these cuts and these setbacks here. And we wish everybody will be able to land on their feet. And of course, everything here will be for the best in the long run. If we can hope for that, I really hope so. That is the case. That being said, again, another, bit of a downer there in terms of the news, but I will be remiss without mentioning that, because I think it's another very significant shift here in the gaming industry. That being said, we're going to move on to something hopefully a little more upbeat, a little more interesting here. This is the upcoming release of the new season of Call of Duty. So any of our Call of Duty fans here, I thought I'd mention this because it's been a while for that game, and we did have some big reveals here for their new season of all their new content and releases. Got a giant, huge picture here they released. Just going through the rough notes here. I'll keep this very brief. You have a new Resurgence mode. So those who are fans of Warzone, of course, the return, I should say, not really a new mode, the return of Resurgence from Call of Duty Warzone and Modern Warfare 2019, the previous title. So it's a bit of a smaller map here, which is actually does, I think, speak to me a bit more. I'm not a huge Battle Royale player. I will say I'm maybe a little more Battle Royale out. I remember playing Fortnite back in 2017 or 2016, maybe even when it first was released on PlayStation. It was, it's the week actually came out. I remember playing it very bare bones. I remember being, a free Unreal Engine game. And I remember, I've had my, fix of Battle Royale at the time. I remember PUBG, PlayerUnknown's Battleground. Shout out to PUBG. I had played back then, very fond of that title as well. And it's been many years. I played Apex. I've played. I'm losing my train of thought here. I played a lot of things, Brawl Stars, and a lot of Rumbleverse and Knockout City. There's some more recent games that are really worth think of it, but there's been a ton of great battle royales. And that being said, they've not always been the biggest. My biggest, gravitational pull. I tend to gravitate towards single player titles. Traditional multiplayer titles, different formats, co-op as well. And I don't get me wrong, I do like some battle royale from time to time, but I think this particular mode speaks to me even more because I think it's a little smaller, a little faster paced, tighter areas, tighter combat. And I think that'll probably speak to me here with this new Sheikah Island map is what it's called in season 2 of Modern Warfare 2. I'm gonna bring up this picture here on Twitter very briefly, just so I can show you guys a little closer up here. We have some new, of course, skins, operators. They're actually adding 5 new weapons to the game, which I think is pretty interesting here. We have 2 new rifles as well as a crossbow, which is interesting. You probably have to, due time, we add the crossbow to Call of Duty. You always get that at some point. The dual katanas, which is another thing where I feel like we've always get that later on at some point with Call of Duty. And then as well as this, another, I believe I can't really zoom too crazy in on these pictures here, but we get the Tempest rifle here, another marksman rifle. So 2 kind of assault rifles, a shotgun here, and then a marksman rifle. So we have some new modes for multiplayer. A lot of our old, traditional party modes we see in older Call of Duty's Infected, Gun Game, Grind, Drop Zone. Some newer ones here. One in the Chamber was a real fan favorite. I remember that from Black Ops 1. That being a real fun game there. We have the return here of some older maps. We have Dome from Modern Warfare 3, if you remember that map. We have this museum map, which was actually supposed to be in the game at launch. I actually played this map, in a pre-release build of the game that I had access to playing to, which is really cool. It was not in the final release, I believe, because it was based at the actual LA observatory in real life, similar to some other museum, at that hotel map in Call of Duty had some similar concerns. Was still able to launch with that map, but this one was taken, I believe, right on launch day. I guess they worked it through. They've redone the map. They figured things out how to not make it apparently as reminiscent of the real life location, and now it's being added back to the game this season. And then we of course have the Zaya Observatory map, which is actually already, I'm not sure why they're promoting this because I just played this map with a friend actually yesterday, I believe, in co-op mode. I believe they're adding it though to the the larger like ground war mode. So it's not necessarily a new map. I guess they're opening it up to those modes. So I guess that's why they're adding it here to make it a battle map. So I guess that's relevant. The one thing I will say here is that they added the ranked play and the raid mode. And I'm almost done here on Call of Duty, but I did want to mention this because they did not mention the hardcore mode. This has been another fan favorite. I mentioned this as well. It's my favorite way to play Call of Duty. It's really the only way I really kind of like to play Call of Duty on multiplayer, unless I'm playing sort of co-op mission or something like that. But I'm more of a fan of the quicker, more realistic, gameplay Twitch shooters. You quick, a couple bullets and you get the kill there. More so, like kind of a sim gameplay rather than like a more slower Halo-esque kind of like bullet sponge type game where you have to do a lot more, shots to get your enemy. Not really my cup of tea when it comes to shooter games, but then again, I'm a big fan of the hardcore mode for that reason. And I mentioned that because they said it was supposed to come out with this season, and it's been delayed months and months now. Again, back in November, they said it was supposed to come at launch. I bought Call of Duty expecting it to be there. It wasn't at launch. It was delayed. I thought, okay, at least it'll come out sooner. They then added the tier 1 mode, which is kind of a halfway concession. It's not all the way to the hardcore. There's been some stat differences there. It's not as high damage as, not really the mode we were looking for. And then they said finally it's gonna come in, early February when the season 2 comes out. Of course, this season was delayed a bit, now to February 15th, this Wednesday, rather than earlier this month like it was supposed to be. And as they've now released this, promo footage and this promo shot, we don't get any, mention of hardcore mode anymore whatsoever. So I'm hoping that maybe that is just still in there and it wasn't an afterthought or it wasn't delayed once again, but it's not in this picture. So that's kind of the one thing I'm waiting for with Call of Duty. It's the main way I play. And it's kind of a cycle now, at least for the past, I guess, since 2019, maybe 4 years now, where I have to get the game, wait 4 to 5 months to get the mode I want to play. Then the game gets, bombarded. I hate to use the word bombarded, but a lot of updates with Warzone and these other extra modes. And I'm not necessarily a Warzone player. And then by the time it's already summer, they're promoting the new Call of Duty. And then it's kind of, the same cycle repeats itself again. So I do hope that, in the future, we don't have these same like huge content delays where it's like you're waiting like 4 months after the actual game launches to really like it seems like the multiplayer to really be fully built out, have all the menus working, have all the extraneous modes that we kind of expect. Again, I understand that's the way they structure it as a game as a service, but it does seem like we're in this kind of like eternal delay mode now where the launch of a game really isn't the launch. It's more so the pre-launch, and that you guys kind of like play the half or bare bones version of that fully stacked title until it fully becomes its fully fledged self with all its modes. Again, 4 or 5 months later, like we see. And again, I'm not the biggest fan of that cycle. I wish I could see more games launching with all of this content at launch. But then again, now it's like, why do that when we could, monetize and have months and months of microtransaction, income and promotion and marketing promotion of material, of that same material. So I get why, this works and why it's almost, bound to happen and is strategized to play it out this way for a long time now. I guess I'm just not the biggest fan of that in terms of, the way I play my games. And I would like to see more games launching with, with the things that are announced and are expected to launch with. That's all, I think it's a pretty reasonable, statement there, but I digress with Call of Duty. I think we're going to move on. We'll see that later this week. And if we do, report on the next episode this Friday or maybe next Friday, depending on what we do, our next episode here, I will maybe comment on that and see, give you a little update whether or not that was included. But that being said, we have about 10 minutes here where I kind of want to, wrap our show in the next 10 minutes. So I'm going to move us down to our next final 2 stories here. And these last 2 are the 2 big ones. So try to get through these as fast as I can. But of course, the main, the star of the show here this week, the Nintendo Direct. So as I pull this up on the docket, we have our friends here over at IGN, just our roundup article. As always, that a very, very easy way to digest the entire showcase in a text format for you guys. So of course, our big, huge announcement from the showcase is the final, full gameplay trailer for Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. We get our release date, which I believe is May 12th. I don't want to be mistaken here, but okay, I'm not. May 12th, 2023. I always love to say that right before I scroll that or read it. And it's a 50-50 whether or not my memory serves me correctly there, but this time it did. Of course, we have to wait a little longer there, but not too far out whatsoever. And if you're a fan of the Zelda series, it's time to get, you're probably getting very excited for that release date. We also get the long-awaited Metroid Prime Remastered. This is something people have teased joked about, said the Switch is needed for a long time. Metroid Prime, of course, is a very it's a beloved game. It's like one of those fan favorites. You see a lot of people talk about it all the time. It's one of their favorite games of all time. Industry, big name industry, Jeff Grubb was always, tweeting about it, leaks, rumors, industry insights. And we'll talk about him actually in our next story because he had just leaked the PlayStation State of Play upcoming. He has always mentioned this game, saying it's one of his favorites. And he had not had this leak apparently this week, but he was very ecstatic about this one finally being remastered for Switch, as were a lot of people. So very cool to see here. And the coolest thing about it is actually it's already out right now as of this airing. So no matter when you're watching this live or on recording, you can go on Nintendo Switch store, get the remaster right this instant. Came out on the 8th last week, right as it was announced. So taken out of that Xbox playbook a few weeks back with Hi-Fi Rush, Nintendo had their own little shadow drop kind of game. Now it's been here. Maybe we'll see that in that State of Play on Sony now be pressured to drop a game, in a week or two from now, whenever that State of Play happens, to kind of join the club here and having a day on, release announcement type, little cycle here. But that being said, I'm going to show a little footage from that Metroid Prime really briefly in a second here, as well as Zelda. That's why I'm kind of glossing over the two of them and just sharing these with you guys. We also had another trailer for Pikmin 4, the other big Nintendo game this year, and a release date. So this is coming out July 21st. And I'm not sure we're going to be able to show that trailer. So we'll let that run for a second. We'll give you a brief glimpse of that one in a minute before we head on to our two big ones with Metroid and Zelda being the main event, really. Another thing I wanted to mention, not as big as a story as Metroid and Zelda, but they've just announced another addition to the kind of retro library you have on Switch Online. We're now getting Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. Very cool. It's already online today. The same thing with Metroid Prime. It was kind of a day and date drop there. The titles at launch are Super Mario Land 2 to 6, Golden Coins, The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening DX, Gargoyle's Quest, Game & Watch Gallery 3, Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, Metroid 2 Return of Samus, and Wario Land 3 and Kirby's Dream Land, excuse me. And pretty interesting launch lineup there. There's a ton of Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games that you could pull from. As much as I think this is really cool, I have a Game Boy, multiple Game Boy Advance Game Boy Advance is actually, excuse me, still in my possession. It was one of my favorite consoles of all time. It's I think it was my first handheld. I should say, it was the Game Boy Color, then the Game Boy Advance. At the point, I didn't have the original Game Boy Advance. I had the Game Boy Advance SP, the foldable flip top version, which was definitely, I think, still one of the best versions. I really love that Game Boy. But anyway, speaking of that, since I do have that, that legacy device here, I can go buy other Game Boy games. I'm not sure for me as a consumer if I'd want to pay a monthly fee that I'm not already paying for Nintendo Switch Online, because I'm not, I don't really get that. I don't see. Don't get me wrong. If you're a traditional Nintendo Switch player and you have that value there, that's great. You have a lot of the retro library as well, the NES, the SNES. A lot of stuff being added from time to time here. But I do think, especially with Nintendo consoles, if you do have your old Game Boy sitting around, I would recommend. I'm not sure if this is the most value for you, but definitely, it's a really cool announcement. So a great addition regardless, especially if you're already paying for the service. Advance Wars 1 and 2 Boot Camp release date revealed. This was a remaster kind of packaging of these games, finally coming out on April 21st. I say finally because I'm not too well versed in the history of this title. I have not played Advance Wars before, but I do know a lot of fans, longtime fans of the series were looking forward to this early last year. And it was delayed only actually due to real world circumstances. I believe the start of the Russian-Ukraine war was around the time of this game being released. I want to say early 2021. Again, forgive me as my timelines aren't exact here in my brain, but this was the reason this game was delayed indefinitely, because of real world circumstances, and they didn't want to be insensitive, I guess, understandably promoting Advance Wars at that and around that time. But I guess, eventually, time has moved on enough where they've had, I guess, marketing cycles, and they deem it as appropriate time now to finally release this remaster. So that's the case here. It's finally releasing this April. But I thought that was an interesting thing to note there, that is a game that was going to release about, I want to say, like early last year, if not even earlier, and due to some other real world circumstances had to be pushed back a bit. That really wasn't due to the game's development. So I just didn't want to note that, because I think it's a bit of an interesting caveat to that one. Of course, we have this Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Wave 4 booster course. We have Yoshi's Island and Birdo. I'm not going to have probably enough time here to run through that as we're getting close to the end of our show here. We also had Splatoon 3 expansion pass. I know some of our friends in the Discord here were excited about that one as well.
So hopefully you guys are enjoying that. In Splatoon 3, probably some new maps. We have Splatoon 1's Inkopolis coming back. I actually didn't realize that. I had missed this part of the trailer of the show, so that's really cool for all of our Splatoon fans there. Of course, we have a Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Gets a new trailer, a demo ahead of its February 24th release date, so that's right around the corner there. And then we also have Xenoblade Chronicles 3 with their own expansion pass, Volume 3. So a lot of DLC and expansions here, and I'm not complaining there for Nintendo. It's actually very interesting from them because I feel like we don't always get a lot of DLC. I mean, I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of great Nintendo DLC in the past, but it's cool to see a lot of they're really successful recurring IPs here. Get some cool a lot of Volume 3s, I should say, a lot of expansion pass 3s here, but very cool expansions here. We also had Fire Emblem Engage, a very recent release, has done really well in terms of performance here. They have brand new DLC as well. It seems like new characters there for that game. I don't know too much about that game, to be honest, but I do know it has got a lot of great reviews now. I think it outperformed Forspoken even on PlayStation, so it's pretty great performance there in terms of some new Nintendo games. We also have Disney Illusion Island that was I want to say announced at that indie or E3 rather, not E3, that's Summer Game Fest, that whole summer event in lieu of E3, as I was saying earlier on the hour today on the show. We're finally getting a release date for that one, which is July. So I believe that's July 28th to be exact there, 2023 on Switch. And it's a co-op platformer. So I believe we covered this on the show in the past. If you want to go back to our summer episode there, a few episodes past, we showed the gameplay of this. Really, really cool. I think if you're a Disney fan, it's cool if there's some more mainstream Disney Mickey type games out there that we don't see a lot of those. We have Disney Infinity in the past. Of course, we have Disney. The name is escaping me now because we covered it so much on the show. But it's gonna bother me. I'm gonna have to look it up on my docket here. It's gonna bother me, but I'll put a pin in that for a second. Starlight Valley. It's something like it's on the tip of my tongue. But we have that Disney game out right now. But cool to see more of like a mainline like Mickey and Minnie kind of thing. And Donald, and it seems like a good time there. But that's about it in terms of all the announcements. In terms of in the Nintendo Direct, we have some more here with Octopath Traveler 2 demo coming out, which is really cool if you're an Octopath fan. And I believe the full game's coming out February 24th, so right around the corner. No new news really for that. We had that Bayonetta Origins game. Again, we talked about this already in the summer as well, getting a March 17th release date, so that's the news there. And Dead Cells getting a March 6th release date. Dead Cells Return to Castlevania. And then we also have a few more announcements here. We have Etrian Odyssey Origins Collection is bringing 3 original games to Switch and PC. That's on June 1st. We also have Baten Kaitos, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that, 1 and 2 HD Remaster, bringing forward these GameCube classic games to Switch. And I'm not sure we have a release date for that yet. And this was one of the last big ones as well, Tron Identity, which we saw a bit back in the summer as well, now coming to Switch in April 2023. So another release window there. Again, a lot here. We had a lot in this Nintendo Direct here, guys. I know I'm kind of rolling through here. We have Katamari Reroll here coming in June. Apologies if I'm skimming over. I know there's a lot of content here, but we are in like the last minute of our show, and I don't want to go too overboard here. So apologies that I don't want to rush through this last stuff. We're going to quickly discuss these 2 trailers in the next 5 minutes or so and wrap up. Apologies for the rushing here, but again, I will put all this good stuff in the description of the video if you want to check out all these smaller kind of announcements from Nintendo Direct. Then again, we have a lot of other announcements here. We have Master Detective Archives at the end here, and that's about it. So again, a lot of other extraneous announcements that may not be as high profile, but still, I wish I had more time to mention all of them here. My apologies that we can't go too in depth on all of that good stuff, but I do want to show 2 of the big game here that we discussed in our Discord. Actually, I had a few of you guys discussing with me over back on Friday some of the Nintendo Direct announcements. So thank you for your comments and all that you're excited for. I saw one of you asked me. I apologize. I don't have I don't know your name, but I think it was Hexaduce. I know your username in Discord. Thank you so much for your questions. You would ask me, seeing that new Metroid Prime remaster, should I jump in on that? Should I go play Breath of the Wild? I haven't played that game yet, and I have a Nintendo, there's some Nintendo sales right now. What should I do? And my kind of answer there, and I'll reiterate maybe my thoughts here as we show some of this Metroid Prime remastered footage. I think Metroid Prime Remaster is a great opportunity just because obviously it's a new, fresh, new, thing on everybody's mind right now. Of course, it's an older game, but this new remaster is brand new. and a lot of people are really excited about it because it's been a fan favorite title for since its release. Really, it has these third person elements. It has the shooter, first person shooter mechanics. It has a very interesting story. The enemy scan mechanics. There were a lot of really interesting stuff with this game. That again, this is something that I've only seen a lot of gameplay of. I've seen a lot of people that I respect, their game opinions of, rave about this game. So it's been something that I've been on the back, it's been on my kind of back burner of my list of games I got to get into. We've seen more of that shooter gameplay here. Some of the comparisons, really direct comparisons between the remake and the traditional game here. Excuse me if I'm a bit nasally here. A bit congested. I apologize. Hopefully you guys can hear me well. But that being said here, I do think this is a really awesome showcase here of the remaster, as you can see on screen, seeing how those new graphics look. Again, 2002 versus 2023. It's 20 years of difference here. There has been some concerns here about the remaster graphics. I know the one major concern was that the original game's reflections, being in doorways and certain like modules on the walls, you could see your reflection, and you can even see like reflection of the entire room. And it was kind of a big mechanic in the doors. And people were complaining that the original textures are completely gone. It's just like kind of a flat texture. And I did see actually some original developers of the game were a little concerned that maybe their original work wasn't being properly credited. I don't want to, raise that as too high of a concern, as I do think that's kind of in the process, that story. And I'm hoping here. I'm hoping I'm not mistaken here, but it seems like they are looking to remedy a lot of that, looking to remedy some of those issues with the reflections, and even looking to properly, give credit to the original developers of this game, because of course it's an amazing remaster here. But then again, a lot of that incredible, work that created this, game to begin with is from those original creators, who released the game back in 2002. And I think they do deserve, credit for this title as well in this remaster for their hard work and, in making the bones and the structure of this title, what it is today, remaster or not. So hopefully that is all worked out there. I hope there's no, ill will there, or negativity between the older devs and the newer devs. I do think it's a great opportunity here for new players to play this classic game. And I really hope that people, we could find, that kind of, that respect and that middle ground here where everybody can, be happy about this new release and there's no animosity. And I don't think that's the case, but hopefully not. Hopefully that all gets worked out. That being said, that's about it for the graphics comparison here. I do want to show us Zelda really briefly before we wrap up our show here and discuss that state of play rumor. And that's all just a rumor. So I'm gonna bring up the Zelda trailer really quickly. A quick coffee break here, and I'll let this speak for itself for a moment, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts on the new Zelda trailer. But pretty exciting stuff if you're a Breath of the Wild fan. So I'll let this speak for itself here on screen. All right, and again, it's a little bit of a slow intro when you guys don't have audio, so apologize for the ominous nature of the beginning of this trailer. But you see that the red moon there, above moon. I don't want to spoil too much, and I also really can't spoil too much because I did not beat Breath of the Wild, so that's the caveat here. So take all my opinions, but agree to solve for probably better reason than not, because I won't be ruining anything like that from this trailer. That being said, we see a lot of the same from Breath of the Wild in a good way here. We see a lot more of, the older enemy types here, more bigger, more expansive. You see the glider. We see the same map areas there with those plateaus, very similar looking to the original game, but we see new enemy types. We see, as you'll see in a minute here, more technology and those links, those powers he uses. We're going to see a lot here in a second. These vehicles that are apparent throughout the trailer, and it looks like almost me even have to find throughout Hyrule, collect, build different parts here. We'll see later on in the trailer, you see these rails here. You see there's different building parts that you're lifting up, moving, interacting with these large creatures, vehicles. There's a lot going on here. You see here, he's picking up this wheel and then building these structures. This giant, it looks like a car, and then a hovercraft, a hot air balloon. Once again, riding horses here. So a lot of different types of transportation in this Legend of Zelda here, Tears of the Kingdom. For those of you, I will say, who are traditional Zelda fans and who maybe were a little critical of Breath of the Wild, thought it was maybe going a little too far off the older formula of Zelda. I hate to say it, but this is kind of more in line with what Breath of the Wild was doing. Doubling down on that open world, that freedom, that interactivity and physics, messing with the physics of the game, playing with those freedoms there. they're really leaning into that. So if you are a fan of Breath of the Wild, like many say it's people talk about being the best game of all time because they love that style of game that much. Then of course there's more of that to be excited about. There's more of that good stuff there. So that's not necessarily a negative or anything like that. If you're someone like me who's really into narrative, not necessarily more so holding your hand, super guided, linear narrative. It doesn't always have to be linear. I do enjoy my open worlds and my freedom there as well. But I do think there is an extent of freedom and maybe lack of, I will say, direct, like really structured, scripted, pushing you in a direction narrative there that really leaves that game open to a lot of different play styles. And again, that's a positive. I'm not saying it's a negative. I'm more saying it as a preferential thing, that if you weren't really, into that type of game and you were a traditional, longtime Zelda player that did not like Breath of the Wild, because there are people who have that opinion out there for sure. You're probably not as jazzed about this new title, because a lot more of that same physics, messing around with that stuff, as I said. So take that as you will. That's about it for the huge announcements. Again, that's May 12th. Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. But I'm gonna move on from that Nintendo Direct there to kind of wrap up our show here in the last 3-4 minutes as we see on the time here, and to wrap up in this nice time chunk here. We have, of course, that rumored PlayStation State of Play that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to bring up, again, there's no news here. It's just literally a tweet I have to bring up. So not much else to talk about on the screen. We're going to wrap up really quickly here, and I can just kind of give you my thoughts on this. So we get a random tweet here. This is a rumor, of course, according to Jeff Grubb on Game Mess. He says that there should be a smaller, quote unquote, low key State of Play in the next 4 weeks. Many people have been saying, sometime during March. Jeff Grubb has gone to say, no, before the end of February, before March. He has said that it should happen before E3. Of course, that's well before E3, the next few weeks here. He reiterates, I see people keep saying March, the State of Play, but I think there's more likely it's going to happen before the end of February. He goes on to say here, also, the second show is not a quote unquote bigger State of Play. It's a PlayStation showcase, which is its own thing, which I'm very well aware of, and maybe some people aren't aware of. The PlayStation Showcase, I think, is by far, we've only had 2 of them, so I say it as this instantiated, ever-present showcase that's always been there. But really, we had it in 2020 and in 2021. Because of COVID, there was the lack of the E3 showcase. Sony didn't have their traditional E3 presser. And what do we have here? These huge blockbuster PlayStation showcases. I mean, they were firing all cylinders those years. If you don't remember, it was like Ghost of Tsushima expansion, Horizon, Gran Turismo, Spider-Man Remastered, Miles Morales. It was like every thing you could think of that PlayStation might be working on. They were like, here we are, we're working on it. Ratchet and Clank. It was everything at the time that we take for granted now in the launch years of PlayStation 5. But really a great first 2 years, and it was like they were just rapid firing in those showcases. Then again, last summer we come to the 2022, the third year after COVID of having these. There was no PlayStation showcase. We went a full year without any showcase. We had smaller State of Plays showcasing some smaller. We had third-party releases. We had some big games. We had Tekken, Final Fantasy, some big third-party announcements, mostly from Japanese studios, but still, very exciting there. But we didn't get anything first-party Sony, and that's what people were really looking for at the PlayStation Showcase last year. That being said, we do have a lot of rumors here. Showcases back. It's coming back to stay, and we're assuming there's going to be some big announcements. Of course, we'll get our big fall announcements that are with our Final Fantasy 16 gameplay, our Spider-Man 2 gameplay before fall. That's all going to come this summer. I have no doubt about that. Before that big PlayStation showcase, though, as Jeff Grubb mentions here, I do believe it makes sense. That State of Play is very imminent. Him saying before the end of February is awesome. Great for me here. I'm sure we'll talk about that on the Endless Report. And, who knows when, maybe even next week. We'll see when that happens. My luck here, I'll hop off the stream today on this Monday, and then we'll get an announcement today or tomorrow that it's happening imminently. So who knows? But we'll definitely let you know as soon as I know on the Endless Report here. We'll be discussing it. But all in all, good news, exciting stuff. We have a lot more to talk about with PlayStation, and I think a lot more PSVR news as well. We had that little tiny, press release to kind of hype up the launch here, but I think they were really smart. Hey, we have less than 10 days. We have 9 days between PSVR launch and me recording this now. Throw out another State of Play. Give us a quick, highlight reel of all that's coming for PSVR. Maybe a big surprise reveal of what's next for it. A first party tie-in game, like I was just talking about earlier on the show. Who knows? Maybe give me a little teaser, just something for Spider-Man. That same screenshot of Peter and Miles that we've been using for 2 years now since that trailer in 2020. I'm definitely, you guys, I'm sure I'm very excited for that game, and I've been excited off of the same 30 seconds of that trailer for 2 years straight now. I'm still excited. So I have faith in Insomniac, of course, that I don't need much more than that, but anything else, I'd be ecstatic about. So maybe some new, even a screenshot, just a single screenshot, that'd be something for me to get excited over. So anything before that, like, June, May showcase, which I'm of course anticipating. I'll take anything we can get in the next state of play. So that about brings me to my thoughts on PlayStation. Of course, Xbox, we've been a little spoiled the last few weeks. That's why today was more of a PlayStation show. We had Developer Direct, the Starfield news, the Redfield news, everything coming with E3, kind of solidifying that. So Xbox has had a good few weeks. We've had some more news with the Activision Blizzard, deal here. I've been kind of, shying away, not shying away, but kind of avoiding discussing that every single week with you guys, because I don't want to just beat that story into the ground when it's the same struggles every week. I think I'll wait until it's a major development. If it gets approved, if it doesn't get approved, there's some huge statement from the FTC or something, of course we'll talk about it here. But when it's more and more so just the headaches of the weekly deal, it's going on for years now, over a year now. I don't want to continue to harp on that so much. But that being said, that's Xbox's and Sony really is biggest contention right now. There were even rumors last week. I didn't include on the show today, but we're saying things like that Jim Ryan over at PlayStation is avoiding Microsoft's calls. Microsoft saying they're trying to help sabotage the deal, which I guess makes sense. I don't know why they want to be helping you make that deal. They've been very adamant about not wanting you to make that deal. So it sounds about right. It's kind of a comical headline that, Jim Ryan isn't answering our calls. We don't know what to do, over at Microsoft. I think it's kind of a little bit comical, but again, it's an interesting, state of affairs they have right now. People have been speaking on, is this Sony holding their hand here, not showing any state of plays? Last year when we missed that showcase, is this them holding back here? I mean, I talked about this as well myself on the show. Are they holding back to continue to appear not as strong as they are, as Microsoft continues to play this underdog card and telling the FTC and the other regulators how powerful Sony is in the industry? We could talk about how goofy or hyperbolic some things are when it comes to the discussion about how realistic their competition is here. I've talked about all that ad nauseum on the show, but I do think, when they're saying things like that, I'm sure Sony is aware of that and how that looks to, trade regulations to the consumers that may not be as aware of their direct competition and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then being like, hey, if we just throw out a ton of great trailers and great announcements of new hardware, not really helping our cause here, but for looking like we're not killing it right now. Again, it's all kind of just optics for the deal right now, but I think those optics do play a bit of a factor. But we're at the point now where, PlayStation can't just sit on their laurels for 2 years straight and not announce anything because they have to appear, the underdog for this, Activision deal. They have a business to run. They have things to do. They have huge, metrics and huge things to hit with marketing campaigns where you might as well just go for it. We want to have these fall 2020 or 2023 releases. They're not going to just sit around and not run their PlayStation business for years because they're waiting on Microsoft. Eventually, you got to start making announcements. And you got to kind of get rolling. And I think we're at that point here. The PS5s are in stock. So again, I know I would talk about a lot about them today, but they're really at a turning point. We're going to see a lot more on PlayStation in the coming weeks. That's for sure. Of course, with PSVR releasing, we're right at this turning point here. You'll have more from me on that. You'll have more from the industry on that. So again, we're at 2:45 here. It's where I wanted to stop today. So thankfully, I was able to get through all of that 2 weeks of news. Again, we had that delay last week. My apologies that I wasn't able to relay all of this great, gaming news to you guys last Friday, but we did it. We got through it all. I really appreciate everybody sticking with me today. As always, you guys are always sticking with me. I appreciate you. And that being said, I will be closing up shop here, closing up the podcast in a few moments. So as I go over all of our news stories here, I don't think we have anything straggling other than that upcoming state of play. So I'm going to move over our docket here. I want to thank you all once again for joining me. As always, we have a ton of really great content coming up at Endless Studios here. I've been really enjoying chatting with you guys in the Discord. I mentioned today we had some great conversations on that Nintendo Direct, despite me not being able to stream on Friday. So really was cool to talk to you guys regardless and get your thoughts and everything going on there. And I hope, we can do that in the future, as we continue to discuss all the latest and greatest here. But that being said, look forward to what's coming up in Endless Studios on the channel here. I've been saying this a lot at the end of our past streams, but really, you guys have no idea. There's so much awesome stuff going on in Endless Studios right now, so I can't wait to show you all that we're keeping under wraps of it, but not for much longer. Again, I'm so excited to share more with you guys. But those of you who are part of this community, make sure you join us in the Discord, subscribe here to the YouTube channel, shoot us a like, see us over on Discord. We're on, you said that already. We're on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it, Twitch even. We cross stream on Twitch here if you don't prefer the YouTube platform. So wherever we're streaming, make sure to check us out there. Let us know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. Just want to discuss the gaming news with me. I'm more than happy to talk with you guys. As you can see, I love discussing everything that's going on in the industry. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, what you guys think of these rumors. You think I'm wrong? You think there's something else going on? I'd love to chat that out with you guys in the Discord. So again, that about does it for me. Thank you guys so much for joining. This has been episode 42 of the Endless Report. And I'm so thankful that we finally got to get the stream out here, and everything going on. So that about does it, guys. Thank you again. And I will see you on the next episode of the Endless Report. So I'll see you then. Take care, guys.